Well, good evening, folks, and to those councillors and staff who are attending a further meeting here tonight, thank you so much for joining us. To those that don't know, I'm Bruce Smith, the Westland District Mayor, and I'd like to go around the table and just introduce the various people who are providing you with the information tonight. We'll start with Chief Executive Simon Bastian.
Yeah, good evening, everyone. My name's Simon Bastian, Chief Executive of Westland District Council. Tonight we'll take you through a presentation on what we have in terms of assets, what we have in the impacts on finance on the Three Waters reform, and then through a transition process, what that would look like under a reform process. So one of the most significant decisions this council will be making. So buckle your seatbelts and we'll get into it.
Thanks, Simon. And Scott Baxendale.
Hello, yes, I'm Scott Baxendale. I'm the Group Manager, District Assets. So Three Waters is a staple part of what my team provide for the residents of Westland.
And Leslie Crichton.
Yes, good evening. I'm Leslie Crichton. I'm the Group Manager, Corporate Services, which incorporates finance. So my part of this is the finance side of the Three Waters reform.
And Councillor Hart.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Anna Hart, Councillor for the Northern Ward, Westland District Council.
Thank you. And Paul Madgwick, who's Chairman of Makawhio.
Kia ora tātou. Yeah, iwi rep.
And Councillor Latham Martin.
Well, Maria, everyone, good evening. It's awesome that you've tuned in. Councillor Latham Martin, Councillor for the Hokitika Ward on the Western District Council.
Well, look, for all those that have joined us on the Zoom meeting tonight, we're here to enable Council to engage across Westland in relation to Government's Three Waters reform proposal. Central Government wants to amalgamate and centralise water services from all 67 local councils. That's potable, and potable means drinking water, wastewater, which is sewage, and stormwater systems. The plan is to create 4 corporate monopolies like Auckland's Watercare, a new national regulator, Te Mato Arawa, which will determine water standards, is being created by legislation at present. Thanks, Paul. This comes with warnings of $160 billion or more needed for upgrades across the nation. Your council supports the supply of good water delivered by all councils around New Zealand. As we receive more and more information from government expanding on the benefits of the proposed reforms, we're really struggling to see how the proposed reforms will benefit our Westland communities. The focus on water causing health issues by government is mischievous, with councils around New Zealand supplying clean, healthy water with very few exceptions. Now, we note that our present council's LTP reflects considerably more spending on infrastructure, which is not being calculated in any of the reports. The transfer, or ultimately what could be confiscation, and for many councils up to 30% of total assets for an 8 cents in the dollar incentive payment, feels unreasonable and reckless. The proposed governance structure is complex, removing almost all local democracy. I'd now like to introduce you to Simon Bastian, the Chief Executive of Westland District Council for the last 4 years. Simon has driven the restructure of our operations section and led the team that has raised millions of dollars from government to invest in our community infrastructure. He's recently had his contract extended for a further 5 years. Simon, it's all up to you.
Yeah, thank you, Your Worship. And let me take you through a presentation which we have developed for this session. So what is Three Waters reform and how could it affect Westland? First of all, I'd like to take you through the assets that we do hold within our portfolio of Three Waters. The three Waters stands for drinking water, stormwater and wastewater services. Currently, Westland has 9 drinking water suppliers. This feeds 2,763 ratepayers which are connected to those suppliers. They range from Kamara all the way down to Haast. And obviously they range in different sizes and scales depending on the size of the community. The 4 wastewater suppliers, we have these situated through the district. Of these, 2,149 ratepayers are connected to those schemes. And we have 1 reticulated stormwater supply. This is Hokitika. And obviously there are 508 ratepayers connected to the stormwater supply. In regards to our drinking water assets, these assets are relatively new in terms of age. In fact, some of them are less than a year old. The oldest one we have on our books at the moment is the Hokitika one, which has been upgraded with the expansion of Western Milk Products back in 2015-16. So those facilities are relatively new, and they come with relatively new technology, which ensures compliance monitoring. So we know when we have a problem with our quality of water immediately. Currently, we're looking at upgrades in terms of storage capacity to ensure we have future proofing in terms of water supply. In regards to wastewater treatment, we have 4 plants through Westland, the largest being the Hokitika Wastewater Treatment Plant. We have the consent on this discharge for the Hokitika Wastewater Treatment Plant expires in April 2024. We have plans to build a new wastewater treatment plant to be completed in time and fully consented before that termination of that consent. Franz Joseph Wastewater Treatment Plant was a new facility which was built after the significant floods back in 2016. We received government funding to progress this one and build this one. It has been given a 15-year lifespan, but this could be extended based on the successful operation of this facility and also depending on the impact of Franz Joseph community. Fox Joseph, Fox Glacier and also Haast are both smaller plants, but also require upgrades over the coming years. We have some desludging we need to do to both of those plants to keep them going for the next 20 years. In terms of risks, our biggest risk is to do with regulation, particularly the discharge of wastewater into water environments. There may be a change in terms of legislation that will see us having to find alternate ways of discharging. In terms of stormwater and underground infrastructure, the only significant stormwater infrastructure is within Hokitika. We have done some considerable upgrades stemming back to the floods in 2015 and 16. These have been quite successful in terms of impact on further managing floodwaters. We have further investments to upgrade even further in the next 3 years. Our biggest point of concern is what is underground, particularly pipework. This is the highest point of risk for council, as a lot of the infrastructure underground is actually starting to show its age, and some of it's due for its 50-year anniversary. So we've got a program of work to replace them over the next 30 years. So why Three Waters reform? Why has the government taken us down this path? It all started with the Havelock North gastroenteritis outbreak back in 2016. There were 54 recommendations that came out of that review. One of them was to form a new regulator, Te Mata Arawai, So that has actually become live as of 1st of July this year. They're responsible for oversight and enforcement of legislation relating to Three Waters, such as drinking water standards. The government also believes that there are greater economies of scale and efficiencies to developing Three Waters through larger bodies than through individual councils. These come in various guises, obviously procurement processes, economies of scale with regards to borrowing capacity, etc. In some parts of the country, the cost of providing Three Water services that meet the current and future health and environmental standards is quite prohibitive. This means that there is inconsistency across councils in delivering Three Waters. The government is aiming to ensure that all councils can meet the health and environmental standards. This means investing in infrastructure where they believe that large entities have a greater purchasing power. The government is also concerned that councils will not be able to meet the challenge of climate change adaptation without the Three Waters reform. I'd like to pass over to Leslie Crichton, our Finance and Corporate Services Manager, to take you through the financial impacts of the Three Waters reform.
Okay, thank you. Good evening. Council has $117 million worth of Three Waters assets on our balance sheet. This is around about 28% of Council's assets coming off our balance sheet if we were to opt into the Three Waters reform. This will affect Council's ability in the future to be able to raise debt to service other activities of Council to the same levels of services that we are doing so at the moment. Council also currently gets around $6 million in revenue through water rates from the community. If Council were to opt into Westland, would receive a support package of $11 million. This package would not be in return for the transfer of the assets. So the figures on these figures are based on the domestic ratepayers and are averaged figures. The current average domestic annual Three Waters rate for Westland District Council is $1,079 per annum. We've tried to use the same methodology as the government have used, and we determined that in 2051, if Council does not opt into the Three Waters reform, the average cost for ratepayers will be $3,105. The government estimate that the average cost will be $1,640 if we opt into the Three Waters reform at 2051. However, this is where there is a big variance between Council figures and government figures. In comparison to Council's year 2051 average cost of $3,105, if Council opts out, the government have estimated the cost to be $8,690. So there's a big difference between the two figures. The differences between these figures are due to the amount of investment that we have determined that is required against the amount of the investment that the government has determined that is required to service the Three Waters. So as part of our review, there are major financial matters that we will have to review and have to look at. They still need to be worked through. We're not in a position to be able to determine these at this point in time. Those stranded overheads, these are costs which are not directly attributable to Three Waters, but are spread across all of Council's activities. These are things such as corporate overheads, IT systems, financial systems, and the Council headquarters building. We'll also need to review our debt funding. It still isn't known whether debt will be directly attributable to Three Waters, will be dealt with by transferring to the new entity along with the assets, or whether it will be left with Council and a cash payment made to Council. However, swaps and interest rate hedging instruments, and we use these to manage interest rate risk, are likely to be left with Council, and these will become an overhead. We'll need to look at our retained depreciation reserves. Any reserves that have been funded intergenerationally by the Westland ratepayers will need to be transferred over to the entity together with a cash payment. Council's balance sheet after the three waters and assets and reserves are transferred. We'll need to determine what the balance sheet looks like after those three waters and reserves are transferred. Our asset base determines whether we can continue to borrow cheaply through the local government funding agency. We have to meet half-yearly covenants to be able to borrow with the local government funding agency. And if we don't meet those covenants, we will still need to borrow to meet costs for our other services, but we'd have to borrow through banks and it would cost the council a lot more.
So moving on from Leslie's discussion about financial information, we hold a lot of technical information within district assets in Westland on the condition of our water assets. And we have a plan to invest money over the next 30 years, which takes us through to 2051. And our plan would mean that by 2051, we will have spent just short of $54 million on investment in our capital assets. And that's the green line that is showing on the slide that you're looking at now. If you look at the blue line is a figure that the government have come out with, which in their view takes account of growth and also improvements that they expect us to implement over the next 30 years. And there's quite a difference between those two numbers, one which is known, one which is estimated. Just moving on to the next slide, we're going to put a lot of money into Three Waters over the next 10 years. Westland's going to invest $28 million, and that's going to be broken up across the three areas of drinking water at $10 million, stormwater at $2.8 million, and wastewater at $15.2 million. And if you then actually break that down and look at the individual areas, within drinking water, you've got the Hokitika water mains replacement at $1.3 million. You've got Hokitika water treatment plant improvements at $1.8 million. And you've got Franz Joseph new water treatment plant at $3.6 million. On stormwater, Hokitika stormwater mains replacement at $887,000. Livingston Street pump upgrade at $1.6 million. And then on wastewater, we've got a Hokitika wastewater lines replacement at $596,000. Fox Glacier wastewater mains, $594,000. We've got the Hokitika wastewater treatment plant, which we touched on earlier on, at $10.167 million. Hokitika wastewater mains replacement at $2.2 million, and Haast wastewater treatment plant upgrade at just less than $1 million. A lot of money going into that. In addition, Westland District Council is currently investing $6.8 million in capital water infrastructure through the Three Water stimulus funding at no cost to local residents. And all these projects are to be completed by March 2022. So how will the transition work? Well, transition refers to the tasks required to ensure that the new water entities are able to actually commence their operations from the 1st of July 2024. Through the transition, there may need to be some central oversight from the government to ensure that council's decisions on water and water investment actually align with the intentions of the new water entities and to make sure that we're not moving in different directions. There's a likely expectation that councils will still need in the interim to bill and collect revenue for a period after the new entities formed. And as Leslie was touching on earlier on, there's got to be a fair amount of work reworking the council's finances to account for the loss of its revenue, including the impact on corporate overheads and fixed assets, which Leslie explained. also the movement of any depreciation reserves to the new water entity, and the impact of the loss of assets from our books on the ability to raise loan finance. There is a personal impact for staff of moving to a new role or choosing to move to a new role in a new entity, which may or may not include new terms and conditions of employment. But there's also an impact for those staff that remain behind in the council and whose roles may need to change in a restructured environment. The council will need to revoke certain bylaws and to review other documentation that's impacted by the loss of the assets, such as the infrastructure strategy. So the impacts of transition. Well, there's a lot of things happening, apparently all at the same time. So you've got the Future of Local Government Review and the Resource Management Act reform are interlinked. All are going to impact on future generations, but don't appear to be considered as a whole package. These things look as though they're happening in isolation. There will be future impacts, but it's not clear what the financial picture, what the final picture actually is going to be. And we're not sure that the government is taking a holistic view of these reforms. The compensation that's on offer is not equitable to what the community has invested in over the past 20 years in Three Waters infrastructure, or what we propose to be investing in the future. We do not forecast needing to spend anywhere near the money that the government forecasts, and it's more like the 54 million I was outlining earlier on. The unique nature of the geography and population of New Zealand limits the benefits that the government proposes the new entities will achieve. There's been little evidence provided about these efficiencies, aside from some economies of scale. And each council across New Zealand will have different contractors and different contractor relationships. As noted in previous slides, our financial forecasts do not align with the government's forecasts. The funding from users on metered water, who are generally large commercial businesses, offsets the rates paid by non-commercial ratepayers. This reduces the average cost for domestic ratepayers in Westland. Westland is a low growth district, but the single entity of Entity D will comprise of districts with different growth models, including those with high growth and those with static growth. And this could result in a lack of funding prioritisation for smaller, low growth or static districts. We don't know how much influence the community will have with the large entity. The community currently has more say in the provision of Three Water services through the long-term plan and the annual plan processes in Westland, as can be seen by our current approach to the Hokitika Wastewater Treatment Plant, where we've taken the community's view into account and changed our original plans. We're directly accountable to the community and have the resources to respond to natural hazards as they happen. The large entity may not be able to respond as quickly or easily, depending on their processes and their governance model. Within transition, each council is going to have to provide due diligence of data and financial information, looking at transferring IT data, and there will have to be the incorporation of 67 different approaches to service delivery across New Zealand into these 4 entities. So what's the community told us so far? Continued public ownership of Three Waters infrastructure is a bottom line for the government. The government is developing safeguards against future privatisation, making it more difficult to privatise water services than under the current arrangements. Three Waters assets would transfer from the councils to the new entities and would sit on the balance sheet of the new entities. Councils will collectively own the water service entity provided services for their district on behalf of their communities. And the new water services entities would be governed by an independent, competency-based boards. The day-to-day operation of the new entities would be managed by the senior executive teams of each entity. And beyond the community representation provided by local councils and Mana Whenua via the regional representative group, each entity will be required to engage with communities in a meaningful and effective manner on all key accountable documents. But there is a view that the majority of people don't want to opt into Three Waters reform. People believe that communities will lose their democratic say in the way that services are provided. They want services to be managed, built and operated locally. They don't believe that the reform will improve efficiencies. And there is a view that previous consolidation of assets has not improved the provision of services. Each region has different needs, and this would take away the control from ratepayers. The process is seen to be undemocratic and being forced on councils. Does the government have proof that the councils cannot manage assets themselves? That's not clear. And there is a question around the assets being taken and the shared control across with Mary. Thank you.
Thank you, Scott. So what happens next for the Three Waters reform in council? So we will be taking all the feedback that is coming through from yourselves, and we then have to supply this feedback in terms of through to council for them to make a decision. The decision process is not required within this month, but the feedback needs to go back to DIA for their interpretation and provide further points of reference for us to consider. We don't have a time frame regards to the DIA process until this 2 months is complete, but there's expectations that an opt-in or opt-out decision needs to be made prior to Christmas. So the next step for us is we've engaged a consultant to work on our behalf, and we've joined in with both Greymouth and Buller in terms of, with Greymouth in terms of assessing the impacts of this transition process. And we'll be formalising a report to council in September for their consideration. Thank you, Your Worship. Back to you.
Look, thanks for that, Scott. Very, very comprehensive, and Simon, a really good report. So a bit of a reminder to people in relation to providing feedback. The answers to the questions that have been received from the community so far are available on the Westland District Council website on the Three Waters Reforms page. And I would encourage you to have a look, find out if your concerns have been answered either during this presentation or at the previous presentation. And to find that, go onto the council website, have a look to the left-hand side at the bottom. There's a button called Three Waters. Give it a click. It's very straightforward, and it has as much information as possible from both government, DIA, and council on it for you to wander through. Now, your feedback now is more important than in any other time that I can recall. If you want council to opt in to the reform program, that's fine. You've got to let us know. It's really important. If you want council to opt out, once again, definitely got to let us know. If you've got feedback of any nature, please email us. The email address is threewaters reform@westlanddc.govt.nz. And you may wish to use the feedback on council's website. It's got an online feedback form. Once again, you go to the council website. It's really easy to use, but you might not be into computers, and that's fine as well. You can post your feedback form to us, or alternatively, drop it in at reception. So as a bit of a wrap up, the consequences of this proposal are far reaching. And it's an important matter for you and for me, and it deserves both our attentions. And feedback is critical. So before I wind up, we'll just go around the table once more. Paul Madrick, would you like to wrap it up? And
Thank you, Worship. Yeah, just encourage everyone to have a say in this. There's nothing greater in challenges that's facing local government than this. So now's the time to have your say. Kia ora.
Councillor Martin.
Thank you, Your Worship, and thank you to the staff for the presentation. I guess for some of you, it may have either helped aid your digestion tonight over dinner, or for some people, probably put them right off their tea. So I'd strongly recommend that you get your views in to us at Council so we can make a really informed decision on where to go with this proposal. We're getting strong feedback to send that we want to then send on to the government by way of resolution. So the more support we can have from our communities, one way or the other, the better.
And Councillor Hart, would you like to wrap it up from your end?
Thank you, Your Worship. Yeah, I encourage everyone to put a submission in or email one of your councillors. It's a very significant decision that we as a council and councillors have to make. So I would encourage everyone to have their say. Thanks,
Councillor Hart. So I think the message is loud and clear. Please put your feedback forms in. I can tell you at this stage from the meeting last Friday, where 97% of the feedback received was to opt out. That's risen to roughly 98% this evening. And so I don't see that being too much of a change over the next week or two. So this won't be the only time that this council needs to talk to you. This is really important. We have another important issue that's coming, and that's about local government reorganisation. Now, we don't think it should be led from the top. We think it should be led from the bottom. After all, the people have the power. So thank you very much for everyone who's attended. I appreciate staff going out of their way and putting this together once again. And for our councillors, thank you so much for attending. Hey, have a great night. It's going to hose down later on. So it'll be a good